Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Propagandacast Lehr with me, your host, Imperial Dane, Master of Instruction. Off here to look at the Osttrupen again. They've also received quite a bit of a change here with the latest patch, the March deployment patch. Osttrupen all of a sudden having gone from being rather weak, in fact, have come to become one of this Osttrupen's strongest units. Since they are now a 6-man squad, each with 80 health, which means they're pretty much as durable as a conscript squad, which again thus immediately puts them as the most durable squad the Germans actually have available. It of course also seen a cost increase, so they're less spammable, though they're still cheaper than a Grenadier squad. In terms of damage, they don't do a frightful lot there though. One has to keep that in mind. I mean, they certainly won't be doing as much as Grenadiers or even conscripts, but at the same time they can still do some damage, like still. So in some regards it rather changes how they're utilised, but at the same time they're always a lot more durable. They can soak up a lot more damage for you, and that certainly also gives them a few more thoughts. They can also now fire on the move, though they're hardly effective when doing that. That's something to keep in mind. Overall you still want them to be in cover to get the most out of them, but again, you've now got a unit which actually is, well, reasonably tougher than what you otherwise have, so that's something to keep in mind, if you will. And of course, to a certain extent, you'll still have one set of numbers of them because they still won't be taking territory frightfully fast. For example, that's really going to be one of their continued main issues, or well, main backsides, besides the fact they won't do much damage even when in cover. So I mean, there are some things to consider there, but ultimately again, also, they're still reasonably cheap to reinforce, though not quite as cheap as they used to be, so that's also another thing to keep in mind. But overall, I mean, an interesting combat unit now available here to the Germans. Not made artificially weak, and that's actually able to soak up a lot of bullets for you, depending on the combat situation. So of course, I mean, there are certain kinds of engagement you want to avoid, and for example, this one is, for example, one, I mean, you're not really going to get much out of, simply because, I mean, they're not going to be the type to sort of take on fortified positions, you know, win the fight. They're certainly to a larger extent, you know, either defensive infantry or infantry used to soak up bullets or draw attention away from more precious troops. Of course, they still possess the Panzerfaust as well, so I mean, they can do a bit there as well. And of course, they can still pop down defensive works on top of everything. So I mean, they're, you know, hardly utterly useless, but I mean, you do require some slightly different tactics with them. Certainly, of course, you have to be careful you don't spam them all willy-nilly. But on the other hand, you do have something a bit more durable that way.
New units are ready to deploy.
And generally, I mean, you want to have them work together in larger formations so they can actually support and concentrate fire. I mean, a single Osttrupen squad on its own is simply not going to win anything. But again, working together, you'll simply have something that can absorb a lot more fire from your opponent. In that department, give you a bit more strength as the Germans, which you might not otherwise have. Since again, otherwise, I mean, you've got 4-man squads and 6-man squads again, will have 50% more durability than your regular Grenadiers, essentially. And you get that for actually less manpower, but of course you also get considerably less damage to your Grenadiers. Of course, that's sort of a trade-off you have to make. Do I want something to actually soak up bullets for me? For example, you know, make me stronger on the defense, because again, I mean, holding a position, they're going to be much harder for the opponent to take out than they are going to be for some of the Grenadier squads. So that's something to keep in mind. And of course, they'll still be handy for recrewing weapons and other things like that. I mean, that's something to keep in mind. And of course, they can still lay down fortification works like bunkers and trenches. So they're hardly all bad. So I mean, with that in mind, I mean, that's really sort of the major overlays of the new Osttrupen. To a certain extent, it's still the same rules as previously, you know. Use them in numbers, all that, but again, now they're much harder to just spam a lot out of. You're probably going to be operating here, for example, with 3 Osttrupen squads, and then you're probably a larger force than you know as much with Grenadiers. But on the other hand, they can simply take more damage at the same time. So there are some slight changes in how to utilize them. Again, that's basically, again, though, operate them in larger numbers, to a certain extent, but at the same time, not quite perhaps the same numbers you will. And again, defensively, they're much stronger now, since previously with the low health, they had a few troubles they're sort of holding out in the longer run. But again, now, with more health than your average Grenadier, I mean, they're actually going to be rather hard to dig up once first in cover, or in a structure. And in fact, now I believe they will actually have a better accuracy bonus in a building than they will in cover. So that, for example, is something to keep in mind. I mean, they're actually quite useful in sort of basically holding up a building and blocking it to the opponent, also drawing in fire that way. to a certain extent, I mean, you suppose you can call them cannon fodder now more than ever, to be honest. Well, previously they were just basically something to amass a large force of. Now they're just there to sort of really soak up some damage. They can also do a little damage, but I mean, you're not going to find them, for example, you know, doing massive amounts of it. And generally, I mean, as previously, you want something else to do the damage. Support weapons, or even a bit of regular infantry to sort of do the trick. And of course, getting the officer will still probably be a good priority to have alongside your Osttrupen to get more out of them. So little something there again to sort of keep in mind while trying to get the most out of your Osttrupen. And that largely covers it, perhaps a bit shorter than the others, but again, I mean, it's basically just sort of, you know, quickly updating people on the major points of them. Again, this is, you know, a more stronger defensive infantry, slightly more expensive, so you can't spam. And again, you'll still, though, be relying on other units to sort of really do more of the damage for you. Though, again, I mean, even they benefit from the overall, you know, increased lethality of units. So, I mean, again, they can actually threaten your opponent a bit more than previously as well. I mean, there's a lot of fun things there. So there's always something good to keep in mind while using them. And certainly, I mean, I don't think they're bad. Not at all, but certainly it's going to take a bit tricky to then sort of figure out, well, how do I then want to use these 200 manpower Osttrupen? And again, you're used to sort of, for example, like being previously 120 manpower, where you could actually much quicker put up larger numbers of them. And that's certainly going to be a bit trickier for me, but even then, I do think they still have a purpose. And of course, Major Dong here, rather showing it off quite nicely in another episode, where I've sort of grasped this one, for instance, was a really good example of Osttrupen being utilised as well. And of course, you also still get them from relief infantry, so I mean, overall now relief infantry is also more worth it, since again now you get something that way that can sort of soak up more damage for you, and not something less cannon fodder in that way, but something, you know, more soaky. So hopefully people now have a great understanding of the new Osttrupen, hopefully have a bit of a better grasp of them, perhaps also be a bit more interested in trying them out again. And this is Imperial Dane saying cheers, and hope you enjoyed.